A few years ago, Mindy and I went back east to perform Peter Skinner's wedding, and we were in a hotel in New Hampshire, and I think we were about 7 stories up, and about midnight, the fire alarm went off. And so we got out of bed, and I went through my mental checklist. Phone, wallet, keys, good to go. And then the loudspeaker over the entire hotel was blaring out, "Do not take the elevator. Go to the end of the hallway and take the stairs." Now, if you've ever been in a tall hotel or a tall office building, one stairwell is the same as them all. You walk through the fire door, you descend about 10 to 12 steps to a landing. You make a U-turn. You go down another 10, 12 steps to the floor below you. You make a U-turn. Down another descend of 10 or 12 steps to a landing, make a U-turn, down again 10 or 12 steps, and you are the floor below. And so we did that until we got down to the floor, the foyer, and then out until the fire was discovered and the alarm turned off, etc. This is a picture of our passage today that Carol read just a few moments ago from Philippians 2, verses 6 through 8 that we're going to look at. The incarnation of Jesus, when Jesus became human, and it was a long descent. This year, for Christmas, we are doing a series called Finding Rest in the Strangest Places. Week 1, we looked at the genealogy of Jesus in the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, to find rest in that wonderful story over a long period of time. Last week, we looked at the deity of Christ, and today we look at the humanity of Christ. Finding rest for your soul. What is rest? Rest is overcoming that sense of frantic, that I still am looking for something, searching for something that I don't have, that I need, that I just can't find that grasp to hold on to something long enough that satisfies me. That rest that allows me to be content and to be at peace. Or that there's something in you that can just relax because everything you really need has been provided. That's the essence of our study during December. Let's look at Philippians 2, 6 through 8. And this is the descent. And again, think of the stairwell, starting at the very top. Philippians 2, 6 says, "Who being in very nature God." And here Paul takes us to the very top of heaven. And the divinity of Christ, his deity. Jesus Christ was the agent of creation, fully God. And then the descent begins. Down, 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 he descends. He did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. And Carol mentioned this in her Advent devotional. We all do care about how other people treat us, and when they don't treat us the way we think, we get really upset about this. Jesus said, a bad idea. He laid aside the right to be treated as God aside as he was stepping out of heaven. Down, 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 the descent began. But made himself nothing. And here the picture is of Bethlehem, a baby. What else is as helpless as a little baby wrapped in swaddling clothes lying in a manger? Down, down, down he descends. Taking the very nature of a servant being made in human likeness. And here the picture is of a busboy at a restaurant that nobody really sees, nobody pays any attention to. He picks up the dirty dishes and rolls them back, but for the most part, he's in the back washing, cleaning dishes, mopping floors, doing the dirty work. Down, 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 Jesus continues to descend to the point of servant. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself. Not enough just to be a lowly servant, but humbled himself again. Down, 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 the descent continues. And became obedient to death. Obedient to the Father's will, that this was the plan of salvation, and it involved his death. And he descends all the way down to the cross, and 6 hours later, when he breathes his last. Now you might think, well, that's kind of Doesn't get any lower than that. And yet Paul continues, even death on a cross. And the Greek makes it sound like, you're not going to believe this. It wasn't just that he died. He died on a cross. And the picture is something like this, of this long, humble, awful descent. Instead of dying a climactic death, which you would have expected him to do, it was more of a crucifying death, the death of a criminal. Instead of an exalted death, it was an excruciating death. And you think, well, wow, this doesn't get any lower than that. And yet, down, down, down the descent. Matthew records that as he was hanging on the cross, the mob came by, and they ridiculed him and spit at him and jeered at him. Matthew 27:42 says, he saved others. Let him save himself. He's the king of the Jews. Let him come down from the cross, and then we will believe in him. Down, 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 the descent continues to the point of utter humiliation. Instead of dying a hero's death, he died a humiliating death. Now, you might think, wow, that's pretty amazing in these 3 verses to describe this descent of the incarnation from God, fully God, down to fully human. And yet it's a little bit hard for us maybe to connect with, because we've never been to heaven and we've not seen with our eyes what it was like, Father, Son, and Spirit, and for Jesus to be the pre-existent one. So let's turn our eyes to Isaiah 53. Isaiah was written about 700 years before the time of Christ, and it looks ahead to the time of Messiah's coming. And my favorite chapter in the book, besides Isaiah 40, is Isaiah 53, known as the suffering servant chapter. Isaiah writes, and you will, if you know the story of the crucifixion and the life of Jesus, you will resonate with this story. And you might ask, how would somebody know to write this 700 years ahead of time? That's a good question to ponder. Isaiah 53:1, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Now, this is not just a question looking for information. This is a rhetorical question. And the idea is something like this. The Messiah is going to be standing right in front of them, and he's going to do amazing things for them, and yet hardly any of them are going to believe it. Even in the second part of this verse, to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed, which is imagery for the Messiah, or God's Son. Verse 2, he grew up before him like a tender shoot. And here, he probably can't think about Christmas or Bethlehem, 700 years, but he does see something of the weakness and frailty of this Messiah. You and I can think of Bethlehem here. He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. Years ago, when we bought our first house, we bought a vacant lot. House was built on it, and when the house was built, we had to put in the yard. I rented a rototiller and rototilled the front, the sides, and the back, and bought a bunch of grass seed and fertilizer and mulch, and got the whole thing laid out. And every morning and every evening when I came home from work, I sprayed water over that to keep it moist. I was tremendously motivated and curious to look for the first little breaking of the ground of the little green grass shoot. And how happy I was when I saw the first one. And each morning and each evening when I got home, you could tell each of these little grass shoots were germinating, coming up through the ground, and that over time we were going to have a yard. This is the imagery that Isaiah uses of Messiah as someone fragile at the very beginning. And again, you hear the same theme from Philippians. Down, 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 the descent begins. The end of verse 2 says, he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. In other words, the Messiah was not going to be one that all the high school kids would vote for as most popular kid, or the homecoming king, or the Messiah was not going to have a future making motion pictures in Hollywood. Nobody was going to be taking his pictures on the red carpet. And by implication in this passage, what Isaiah hints at is that that was one of the reasons why they're going to reject him, because of his appearance. Down, down, down. The descent continues. Verse 3. He was despised and rejected by men. Again, 700 years before Christ comes. I've had a few situations in my life where somebody has despised me, and I've had few more situations where I have been outright rejected. No matter what I've done, no matter what I've tried to do, somebody has looked at me and said, "Not enough. I'm done with you." And that is painful. It is very painful. Some of you have experienced that, and you know what I'm talking about. Well, so was the Messiah going to experience that in his humanity as a human being. Down, 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 the descent continues. A man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Who cannot identify with that in our humanity? A man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, familiar with suffering, he says. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. In Old Testament times, if you had leprosy and you had to go into town for a reason, perhaps to buy food, you had to hide your face from other people so they wouldn't see you. And you had to call out, "Unclean, unclean," so nobody would get close to you. Now that's an image here that Isaiah picks up, but he reverses who's hiding their faces and why. Here he says that people will hide their face from the Messiah because he's so disgusting to them. If you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you watch how that happened with people who hated him. Down, 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 the descent continues. Verse 4. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. That's really good news. And the picture here for us as Christians is you might think of the cross and Jesus hanging on the cross, and you might imagine a long line of people waiting to file by. And each one of them has a wheelbarrow. And inside that wheelbarrow, he's got all of his sins, his failures, his weaknesses, his shame, and he waits for the next person to say, "Next!" You wheel your wheelbarrow up, and you begin to take your failures and guilt and sin and shame and heap them on the shoulders of Jesus on that cross. And when you get your wheelbarrow all done, somebody says, "Next!" And you take your wheelbarrow and move on, and the next person comes in. Person after person after person with their wheelbarrow of shame and guilt and failure and sin, and place it on his shoulders. Now you might think that once you unloaded your wheelbarrow, you would be tremendously grateful that somebody took all of that upon himself and not upon you. But Isaiah says that's not what happened. After they unloaded all of their stuff on him, they drew the opposite conclusion. As they're walking away, they look back and say, "He must have been a very evil man to have this kind of thing happen to him." We would say he's getting karma. He's getting his just due. Was he a blasphemer? Was he a sexual pervert or abuser? Was he a murderer? Was he a thief? He's probably getting his just due, which is what they said. Yet we considered him stricken by God. God is punishing him for his sin, is what the people say. Smitten by him and afflicted. Down, 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 down. Perhaps you know what it's like to do something for somebody else, a great sacrifice to yourself, and then get kicked in the teeth. That's what happened right here, Isaiah says. Verse 5, he was pierced for our transgressions. Now, this is fascinating to me because 700 years before the crucifixion had not even been invented yet. And yet, Isaiah could see some kind of image that the Messiah was going to be pierced. Of course, we know in hindsight that Roman spikes were used into his right wrist, into his left wrist, and into his ankle bones. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him. By his wounds we are healed. Down, down, down. He continues his descent in the humanity of Jesus. Verse 6, we all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way. I want to live the way I want to. I don't want anybody to tell me how to live. I don't want God to tell me how to live. I don't want Jesus to tell me how to live. I don't want anybody to tell me. I'm going to live the way I want to. And Isaiah says we're all like this. We're just going to, by golly, do what we want to do. It doesn't matter who else says anything to us about it. Like sheep, we have gone astray, turned to his own way. The Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Verse 7. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Did not open his mouth even when suffering. Now, a couple weeks ago, once a week, I have my cheat meal. I've been on a diet for a few months, and I go get a delicious cheeseburger right after worship, or I go over to a corner bakery and get a stack of pancakes. A couple weeks ago, I went to get a stack of pancakes after swimming for an hour. And you have to wait outside, and they bring it to you in a sack, and I ate my pancakes in the car. And I noticed that the pancakes were not steaming hot, not piping hot. They were a little on the cool side. And the butter didn't melt, and the syrup didn't sort of melt along with it. And I sat there in the front seat of my car thinking, I wonder if I should go back in and say something about my pitiful pancakes. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was like a lamb led to the slaughter. Down, 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 even a helpless, stupid lamb. By oppression and judgment, he was taken away. You think, man, the story that just keeps getting worse and worse. After he finally died, the mob over time slowly moves away. They go back to Jerusalem, back to life as normal. Finally, there's just the Roman soldiers, the two thieves on the cross, Jesus hanging there. And the Roman soldiers have to finish up the business of the day. And as they take down the cross of Christ, two people come out of the shadows, so to speak, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. And they've got a pile of cloths and rags with them. And they tell the soldiers, hey, can we take the body of Jesus? And they say, please do. One less thing for us to do. And they unpinned the Roman spikes, picked up the carcass of Jesus, put it in the blanket, they rolled him up, and walked off. By oppression and judgment, he was taken away. Isaiah says, and who can speak of his descendants? Descendants? He wasn't even married. No sons, no daughters. No rhetorical question. Who can speak of his descendants? Now, in Jewish life, everybody lived to be able to pass on the property rights of your particular tribe to your family and your clan. This was a very important thing for thousands of years. And for somebody not to be able to pass on what they had within their clan, within their family, was a shameful thing in that culture and tragic. No wife, no kids, no descendants, Isaiah will say. He was cut off from the land of the living for the transgressions of my people. He was stricken. Down, down, down. The descent continues. Verse 9. He was assigned a grave with the wicked. Even at the cemetery, we're going to make a statement about this blasphemer. He's not going to be up on the hill where the kings are buried and the holy people. He's going to be over there where those rotten sinners are buried with the wicked. We're going to make a statement. With the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Down, down, down. The descent continues. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life a guilt offering, and a guilt offering is the shedding of innocent blood for a guilty party, that one can be made right with God. This is what theologians call the atonement. You can think of atonement as at one meant. We are made to be one with God through this guilt offering, this guilt sacrifice. Now, perhaps as a Christian, I'm sure you have experienced this like I have, when you sin sometimes and you think, oh, I can't believe I did that again. I know better. How stupid of me. I can't believe I made such a stupid mistake again. And you ask forgiveness for God, but then there's something in you that just sort of is like the debris of a crash, and you think, and there's something in you that says, I need to atone for my sin. No, you don't. That's already been done. The point of the Bible is nobody, including you and me, can atone for our sin. Impossible. It's already been done right here at the cross. Now, that's another picture of the downward descent, down, 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 down into the humanity of Jesus Christ. What does this mean for you and me? I'll tell you what it means for me. Do you know what it's like to be tempted? Of course you do. And it is so irritating to me when I go through seasons like this. Hebrews 2:18 says, for because he has suffered and been tempted, he is able to help those who are tempted. The humanity of Jesus helps give me rest in my heart, not get all bent out of shape when I'm tempted. Do you know what it's like to deal with weaknesses in your life? So does he. Hebrews 4:15. We have not a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. This year of 2020, there have been times of seasons or weeks at a time, maybe a few months, where I have just sort of been despondent about such slow apparent growth in my life, spiritual growth. And I just, sometimes, this proverbial 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, and sometimes it seems to me that I'm making 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, or 1 step forward and 4 steps back. And it's just so just difficult, it's humbling to deal with this. And when I think of this, I think about just the weakness of what it means to be a human being. And this particular verse that we just read has been like medicine to my soul this week. He sympathizes with my weakness. He knows what it's like to be human. Have you ever been dirt poor or feel like you're so tired of living month to month? Well, he knows what that's like. Luke 9:58 says, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Do you know what it's like to have big prayers that you're sure God would answer in the affirmative, and the answer is no? So does he. Matthew 26:39, going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. The crucifixion, the cup of crucifixion. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. Do you know what it's like to be abandoned? Some of you have been through awful divorce or the abandonment of children or parents. So does he. He knows that. Matthew 26:56. This has all taken place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. He knows what that's like. Do you know what it's like to feel like God is a million miles away? He knows what that's like. Matthew 27:46, about the 9th hour, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Some of you know that feeling. And then, have you had a broken heart before? So has he. Psalm 34:18, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Philippians 2, Isaiah 53, the downward descent from deity, down, 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 down. And when you think you've gotten to the lowest part, down, down, down to the foyer, down to the parking garage, below the parking garage, into the basement, as low as it can possibly go. But that's not the end of the story. Isaiah 53 ends with the epilogue. He will see his offspring. You say, wait a minute. He will see his offspring? I thought he didn't have any descendants. Well, he doesn't have any descendants, blood descendants. Well, what does Isaiah mean? He will see his offspring. What he means is he will see you if you're one of his kids. And he will see me. And prolong his days. Wait a minute. Last time we checked here, he was in a tomb. Not anymore. Prolong his days. And the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. Verse 11, after the suffering of his soul, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. This is what rest is. The ability to be satisfied with what God provides. This is true of Jesus. And the promise for his kids is it will be true for you one day, fully. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many. He will bear their iniquities. Verse 12, therefore I will give him a portion among the great. Those who serve at the very bottom, the most humble, will be exalted. This is a promise for him. It's also a promise for you. I will give him a portion among the great. He will divide the spoils with the strong. Meaning, it's a picture of the imagery of when the battle is over and the victorious army is able to retrieve all of the things that the enemy had taken out of the town and return them to the people. This day is coming for you and me. Because he poured out his life unto death, was numbered with the transgressors, he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. This is all part of the epilogue of God's story, and it's part of your epilogue if you know Jesus Christ as your Savior and Lord. If you trust him with your life. You say, well, Seth, it's hard to trust somebody with my life. Well, that's kind of a big ask. Jesus says, not so much. If you have the faith of a child, that's all you really need. You say, what does he mean? Well, I have 2 little granddaughters now, and I've had a chance to hold them and walk them and play with them and feed them. And so far, my granddaughters have not had one question about my intentions with them. I remember being a kid growing up and with my mother and father, I never once questioned, really, other than those awful teen years, their real intentions about my benefit, my long-term benefit. Why? Because I had seen repeated demonstrations of sacrifice on their part for me. And because of that, I implicitly trusted them with my life. 18 years at home, 4 years off at college, 3 years of grad school, and my dad said, you're on your own, son. There's something of that in this story. My question to you is, can you read Isaiah 53 honestly and still say, I just don't know if I can trust this Jesus? If you can read Isaiah 53 and still question his sacrificial love for you, you've got some soul searching to do in your heart. Quickly. A little boy and his family moved across the country about 70 years ago and going to a new school. And the little boy was in second or third grade, and they had the back to school day, and he was looking forward to meeting new friends and his new teacher. But he really didn't want his mother to go, and the reason is because mother had a beautiful face on her left side, but she had a large scar on her right side. And the little boy was afraid that if the mother went to school and was in the classroom with the other kids he was learning, that he would get teased mercilessly. And his mother made fun of by his classmates. The day for back to school day came, meet the teacher day. And Johnny was hoping he would just kind of disappear and walk to school without his mother. But she grabbed her purse and she said, well, let's walk together. And they got to school, and the class was filled with kids, and there were a number of mothers there and a few dads. And the teacher went through her, we're so happy you're here at school today for the first day back, and I'm Mrs. So-and-so. And she went through her spiel, and they had cookies and some punch, and over the next 30 minutes, the kids played, and then the families began to leave until finally there was only Johnny and his mother and the teacher. And the mother and teacher were talking, and the mother was interested in knowing the teacher because she had just met her. And Johnny was still sort of distancing himself from his mother, sort of ashamed of that scar. But he was within earshot of the conversation. And after the two ladies talked quite a bit, the teacher asked the mother, tell me, how did you get this scar? And the mother said, when Johnny was just a baby, we had a terrible fire in our house. And I ran down the hallway, and when I got to his room, it looked to me like the room was engulfed in flames, but I could hear him crying through the smoke and the fire. But it looked impossible to go through. There were a couple other people there, and they hesitated going because it was so dangerous, but I ran in, I grabbed my son, and just as I picked him up out of the crib, I looked up and a beam fell down on my head, and I went unconscious, falling into the crib. Thankfully, a fireman was right behind me, unbeknownst to me. He moved the beam. He grabbed the baby with his left arm. He grabbed me with his right arm and drug us all out of that burning inferno. And in the quietness, Johnny realized he'd never heard that story. He'd been ashamed of that scar for as long as he could remember. In that quietness, the mother said, of course, I've never regretted making that decision, even though this scar, 70 years ago, is permanent and can never be changed. It was quiet again. And this time, Johnny had tears in his eyes. And he ran the short distance to his mother, threw his arms around her waist, and buried his head into her stomach and sobbed. This is a picture of what someone else has done for you. They've descended a long, long way. They put themselves in harm's way. They've run into a burning inferno at great sacrifice and cost to them because that one loves you. Let's pray together. If you do not know Christ personally, if you just know about him, may this be the Christmas of 2020 where you come to understand the love of God personally, not theoretically, personally, for one who is willing to sacrifice himself, to run into a fire, to take on danger, to descend into a hellhole again and again and again in pursuit of you. Won't you entrust yourself to him? Will you stop being a sheep that keeps running away from him in rebellion and pride? Let him grab you out of your crib. Let him pull you out of your fire. Let him take you out of the parking garage and basement of your life and lift you up to salvation and assurance and rest for your souls. Would you simply just say, Lord Jesus, that's what I want. I'm tired of sin and running. Thank you for your death on the cross for me. Thank you that you made, and it's done, atonement. And come into my life now, and may your life fill me. May I find that rest I've hungered for all my life.